Hi everyone, my name is Moni.
And I'm Naveen from Before You Play.
And today we are super excited to be previewing a game that is currently on Kickstarter called Voidfall.
This one is designed by Nigel and David Turczi, and it's published by Mindclash. If you're familiar with them, they did Tricarion, Anachrony, and now this is their newest one coming to Kickstarter called Voidfall.
Yes, and so this is a kind of like a Euro game take on a 4X game, right?
Yeah, space battle.
In this game, we play as various houses who belong to a galactic empire called Dominium. And so we are basically competing to rid the galaxy of the evil known as the Voidborn. The game takes place over a large amount of time, and so everything that you see here is going to be kind of like a condensed version of this extremely huge, momentous event that's going on in space.
And time.
The game also features various modes of play, including solo and fully cooperative mode, as well as various different setups for the map. And so today we're going to be showcasing the fully competitive mode using the most basic setup for the map, just so you have an idea as to how the game is played. We're not going to do a full rules teach, but we are going to do a general overview of the game mechanics, just so you can walk away from the video today with an understanding of what to expect from this game.
We also want to note that this is a prototype copy of the game, so things are subject to change in the final production copy. Also, if you are interested in checking this game out, there is a link to the campaign down in the description below. And lastly, if you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing.
And with that, I think we're ready to begin. So if you please direct your attention to the center of the table, we are all set up here technically for a two-player game of Voidfall.
It's like a hybrid tech set.
Yeah. We have the two-player map setup, although we are missing one hex over here because we needed to get everything condensed for the shot. And we just have one player board.
One player board showing.
Yes. And so just to kind of give you the lay of the land, because I know there's kind of a lot of stuff going on over here. In the middle here, we have the main board, essentially. This is not going to get any bigger than this. It doesn't grow any further. But it does represent a huge amount of space.
Yes.
These various hexes are called sectors, and each sector represents an inhabited star system. And you may notice that sectors that contain this Void Storm token next to them are not considered adjacent. This is kind of like a wall of sorts.
It's a barrier.
Yeah. Each sector also has a number of different things in them, which we will explain in a second. And of course, they also have the Voidborn, which are these tokens right here. Those are like the enemy fleet. Over here, we have the galactic board, which just basically helps us keep track of stuff. It helps us keep track of turn order, as well as the different rounds or cycles that we'll be going through. And of course, each player has their own player board with their house faction that's actually removable. You choose a faction and you slip it in to your player board, and it basically keeps track of everything that you need to know throughout the game.
Yep.
There are 4 base houses that all have the same kind of setup on them, and I believe the final production copy will come with additional ones that are slightly asymmetric.
Right.
Players also have their own resource dial that basically keeps track of all of their resources as well as their production values and their own influence dials, because the points in this game are all influence. And so at the end of the game, whoever has the most influence is going to be the winner. A game of Voidfall is basically played over the course of 3 cycles. And so it's called cycles because, like we were mentioning, this is a large span of time. But really, mechanically, these are basically 3 in-game rounds.
Right.
Each cycle is divided into 3 different phases, and at the end of the 3rd cycle, whoever has the most influence over this galactic empire is going to be the winner. And so the 3 different phases of a cycle are basically starting with the preparation phase, then you go into the focus phase, which is where we take all of our actions, and then you end the round or the cycle with an evaluation phase where we have the ability to score points for various things. And so at the start of the cycle, we're going to start with the preparation phase, and here is where we first choose turn order, essentially.
Yep.
Turn order is determined by this area over here, known as the priority. And so based off of some calculations, which we'll talk about later, whoever has priority is technically allowed to determine what turn order they want to be in. And so if I have priority over Naveen, I can say, you know what, I want to go second. And so I would put my token in the second place here and then take the reward that's listed on my priority card. Once turn order has been determined, then whoever is going first has the ability to choose the galactic event card for this cycle. And so these are the galactic event cards. There are 2 cards per cycle. And so in the first cycle, that person would just take both of these cards and choose which one they want to put into play. And so say I were to choose this card right here, it is called the Know Your Enemy galactic event. It basically represents something that is happening in this empire. And so the first thing that happens is there are 2 different events at the very top here that come into play. The first thing is what the Voidborn does to the galaxy, followed by how everybody reacts. And so this is something that we get to do as a reaction. Each card also has a number that's listed over here, which is probably one of the more important aspects of the card. And that tells us how many rounds or how many turns we're going to get to play in that cycle.
Yes.
And so in this example, each player is essentially going to be able to take 4 actions this cycle. And lastly, the bottom half of the card is going to tell us what we're going to be able to score for at the end of the round. And if you're unable to score for either of those 2 parameters, then the very, very bottom basically gives you just something that you can do as a consolation. And so once these cards have been chosen, then we go into the focus phase where players are going to be taking turns taking actions, essentially. Now, the way that actions work is each player has a hand of identical focus cards. And each of these focus cards follows the same kind of anatomy. They all look like this. Each focus card shows 3 different actions that you can take, but when you play a card, you're only allowed to take 2 of the 3 actions.
The 2 actions must be different than for each other.
Yes, and at the top of each action shows a certain type of cost that you have to pay before getting the reward listed right there. At the very bottom of the card, there's also a number, and this is the priority number that we're going to be using to determine the play order for the next cycle. And so basically on your turn, you're going to play a card, take the 2 actions that you want to take, and then it gets discarded. So you cannot play the same card twice in the same cycle. Now, we're not going to go over every single card, but we are going to go over the basic concepts that you're going to see on each of these cards in different combinations. Starting with our resources. In this game, all of our resources are tracked by our resource dial. This is what the resource dial looks like. There are 2 halves to it. The left side here is technically the production. And so these dials tell you how much of the corresponding resource you're going to be able to produce whenever you take that production action. And so the right side of the dial basically tells you how much of each type of resource you have at any given time. So whenever you spend that kind of resource, you just dial it down on the dial. And so there are 5 different types of resources. These first 3, the green, the yellow, and the pink, are considered supply. And so this is basically what you're going to be spending a lot of the times to take certain actions. But the bottom 2 are also really important. You basically need combinations of all 5 of these types of resources to play the game. And so the way that you can increase your production of these resources is via these guilds. And so certain actions on your focus cards will allow you to place out one of these guilds, and they all are color-coded to reflect the specific type of resource you want to produce.
One of the 5.
Yes, and so when you place out a guild, you must place it out into a sector that you control. And I do want to mention, just as a basic concept, that only one person or player can control a sector at any given time. As soon as somebody comes into your sector, a battle ensues, and only one person will be the winner of that sector. And so when you place a guild out onto your sector, these dice here are called population. And the population basically dictates how many ticks of that corresponding dial you're going to increase your production by. Now, actually producing these resources is a separate action. And so some actions on those cards will allow you to produce these types of resources. And so all you do is you increase the right side of your dial for the corresponding resource depending on what the production value shows on the left side of the dial. The kicker here is some actions allow you to produce on the supply resources and other actions allow you to produce on these bottom 2. And you really need all 5 types of resources to do various things. And a lot of times those actions are shown on different focus cards. So a lot of the game is in deciding which focus cards to play that'll give you the certain combination of actions you need.
And in which order, because sometimes you want to increase your guilds in order to have better production so that when you finally take the production action, it's just that much sweeter.
Yes. Now, in addition to the guilds that you'll be building in these sectors, there are also spaces for other kinds of infrastructure known as installations. And installations are represented by these triangular pieces. There are 3 main types that you'll see in the game, although only 2 of them are going to be in use for this version of the game.
In this scenario.
Yes. And they are shipyards, which have this kind of a wrench symbol, as well as defense tokens. Shipyards are used for placing more fleet out into your sectors, and these defense installations are for protecting your sectors
Exactly what
against
they're titled.
Invasion. And so let's talk a little bit about these shipyards. So another type of action that you'll see in the cards is the ability to add more fleet to the board. The most standard basic type of fleet are these corvettes, which are these minis right here. These fleet represent your military power. And so whenever you go to expand into other sectors and try to take over enemy territory, you're going to be using your fleet to do this. There are several different types of fleet in the game, and the number of units you have per fleet base is represented by these cubes. You're going to have a sort of closed system of cubes that we won't go into detail now, but just so you know, whenever you take the action that allows you to put more fleet onto the board, you're going to place out 1 cube per shipyard that you have in the sectors that you control. And so since I'm the purple player, taking this action allows me to place a cube out over here. Now, as a free action, you can always split up your fleet units by adding a second figure and moving that cube to the new base if you say wanted to send both of these ships to different sectors to invade. And so you're really only focusing on the number of cubes that you have out. Now, the primary thing that you're going to be doing with your fleet are invading. The invasion action allows you to choose a sector and essentially move all of your units from neighboring sectors into it. So in this example, if I were to choose this sector, I could literally move all of my fleet in neighboring sectors into that one. And of course, doing so would cause an immediate battle because we do have a Voidborn unit there. But this is the primary way for you to explore and expand your territory, right?
Yep.
Now, we're not going to go into too much detail about combat, but just so you know, the premise of combat in this game is very calculated.
Yes.
There's no luck at all.
Right.
You're essentially going into combat already knowing who's going to win. And the reason for this is because whenever you engage in combat, you're essentially going to take turns removing each other's units. And each time you do this, you're always going to check for initiative order.
Yep.
You're essentially going to see who has the most number of units in that sector, and they're going to get to go first. And so in this example, because I obviously have a large amount of force here, and each Voidborn fleet is only essentially 1 power.
Think of one Voidborn fleet as just 1 cube.
Yes. And so I get to go first, essentially removing their 1 unit.
Yes.
Now, had they had 2 units here, and I went first, removed 1, they would get to react back by removing 1 of mine. And so I would either remove 1 of my cubes from there, or I would remove a base entirely, just like that. And we would essentially continue this way until only one of us exists on this sector. And so I would essentially win this battle because obviously I had a larger show of power here than the Voidborn did. And actually, before combat even started, if this sector has any of these defense, then the first thing that would happen is this defense installation would attack one of my units right off the bat before we even started combat. And I would actually start the battle with 1 less fleet.
Right.
And that is just the basics of how combat works. Combat can be a little bit more complicated, and so you would consult this chart over here, but that is the basic concept of combat. And so in this example, if I were to win this sector by defeating this Voidborn, which would definitely have happened, then I would take over this sector, and basically any sector that you take over that has one of these corruption tokens. And corruption tokens look like this. They're terrible. They basically represent the hold that the Voidborn has over the galaxy.
Right.
But now because I took this sector, I am also now responsible for where this corruption token goes. It does not leave the game, which would be ideal. Instead, I can either leave it in this sector or place it in another sector that I control, or I can place it out onto my player board, which we haven't really discussed much yet.
No.
There are 2 main areas on my player board where I can place this corruption token. I can either place it in one of these 3 areas, which would cause me to have a negative penalty that will basically be with me on the duration of the game until I get rid of this corruption token.
Yes, there are ways to get rid of them.
Or I can place it in one of these 4 areas that hold our agenda cards, which we're going to discuss in a second. But in doing so, it decreases the amount of agenda cards that I can have in play. Or like I said, I could just leave it out onto the board. But the reason why I may not want to do that is the corruption tokens don't allow you to increase the population dice. And so if you're really trying to get your production going in certain sectors, it's going to kind of put a damper on that. In addition, a lot of actions require you to place guilds out or do certain things in what they call pure sectors. And pure sectors are sectors that do not have a corruption token. And so corruption is going to play a large part in your gaming experience. You're going to have to juggle when and where to place these corruption tokens in order for you to fully realize your strategy. And those concepts are the main basic chunk of the gameplay. There are also other cards that you can acquire, including these technology cards over here, that essentially allow you to do all these other things better.
Right.
There's a large variety of technology cards in the game, and you only play with a certain amount of them depending on the scenario that you're playing. They also score you points, and you have the opportunity to upgrade them to their advanced version over here. In addition to those, we also have agendas, and there are certain actions on your focus cards which will allow you to gain these. And agendas are really important for scoring influence points. And so agendas look like this. They all follow the same kind of anatomy as well. On the right-hand side of each agenda card shows a certain type of action that you'll be able to do at a cost when you play the card. Agendas can be played in conjunction with a focus card on your turn. But the card must match the same symbol that's shown on the agenda card. And so the symbol is really tiny, but if you'll notice, this card has the exact same symbol as the politics focus card. The left-hand side here shows you the scoring parameters that you'll be able to score at the end of each cycle. But the way that it works is you have to be able to score the top part of the card just to be eligible to score the bottom. And the bottom scoring condition is a multiplier. So you're going to want to try to score both. Now, when you play an agenda card, you have to have space on your player board in order to even hold on to this card. And that's what this left-hand side here is for. Everybody has a starting agenda that will score the same kind of parameters. But when you play the card, you're going to go ahead and place it in one of these available slots. The caveat here is that each agenda card also shows on the left-hand side a certain amount of upkeep that you're going to have to be able to pay at the end of the cycle, which can get quite expensive.
Yes.
And so the way of going around that is by gaining these trade tokens, which is another type of action or benefit that you can take on your focus cards. These are the trade tokens over here on the galactic board. In order to take a trade token, you have to have space for one. And so each agenda card can hold maximum one of these. But if I were to place my trade token here, that now eliminates the need for me to pay that upkeep. The other thing that's really nice about these trade tokens is on your turn, you can spend a trade token to be able to take all 3 actions that are on a focus card.
Right, because normally you can only take 2 of the actions. With that card, or with that tile, you can take all 3 actions.
Yes, but once you spend it, it gets placed onto the galactic board, meaning you now must pay that upkeep.
Exactly.
And finally, the last type of action that you may see has to do with these 3 tracks on your player board. These 3 tracks thematically represent society, statecraft, and economics. And so basically, when you go up the track, you just get the benefit of what is shown on the next space. These can become very lucrative. Like if I get to the very top of the society track, that's going to score me 40 influence. And so that's essentially it. There's a lot of iconography on all these cards as well as on your player board. And like we were mentioning, the focus cards have a large combination of these different actions on them. It's not going to be like one card is for all of invasion.
Right.
You're going to have one card that allows you to invade and produce and do these things. And so a lot of it has to do with which card do I play and when.
Yes, and in what order. Yep.
And in addition to paying for these actions with your resources, some costs also require you to deploy more Voidborn onto the board, adjacent to your sectors, by the way.
Blocking you in.
Yes,
Yeah.
as well as adding more corruption tokens. And so there's a lot of strategizing with timing in that sense. And so once all players are done taking all their turns that they're allowed to for the cycle, then we go into the evaluation phase. And here is where we have to pay all of our upkeep costs and where we can score all of our influence points. There are various things that you're going to be required to pay upkeep for, including your technologies, your agenda cards will cost upkeep. And this upkeep is tracked on your player board here that you must pay in supply resources, which are these 3 colors. I do want to mention, though, that green represents food. And so each green resource counts as 2 upkeep.
2, yep.
For each upkeep that you are unable to pay, it's going to be minus 4 points. And so you're definitely going to want to set aside some of your resources for that.
Yeah, sometimes some of the actions towards the end of a round will be like, how am I going to pay this upkeep cost? And
Yes.
that becomes part of the stress of deciding which focus cards you want to play in which order.
You got to figure it out.
You got to figure it out. Yeah.
Then we get to do the happy thing, which is scoring our influence points. And so, like we were mentioning at the start of this video, the Galactic Event card shows 2 different things that players can score for. If you're unable to or you don't want to score for either of these things, then you just get the consolation prize, which is at the very, very bottom here, which is basically just giving you something that'll help you in the future. And lastly, each player gets to score all of their agendas. And like we were mentioning, you have to be able to score the top part in order to be eligible to score the bottom multiplier. And these agendas are all going to have different scoring parameters on them. Some of them might score you points depending on the number of a certain type of guilds you have out on the board, or the number of trade tokens you have, or the resources that you have. It's all very Euro in terms of scoring.
They kind of lead you down a direction as to what you want to do once you have these agendas out.
And if you don't have an additional agenda, we all start the game with this basic one that basically lets you score for everything.
Yeah.
You score points for sectors that you're in control of, the number of technology cards that you have, as well as the installations that you have built in sectors that you control. And so that's pretty much it. That is Voidfall in a nutshell. At the end of the 3rd cycle, whoever has the most influence points wins. It's typically a high-scoring game, but there is a lot that you can do.
Now in this video, we didn't go over every single rule or talk about every single icon that you may have seen on the board. There's quite a bit to unpack here, and we just kind of wanted to give you the bare bones understanding of the general concept and flow of how this game is played. So if you do have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and we'll try our best to answer those as best as we can. Like I said, this is just the base scenario here. There's a number of different scenarios, as well as the co-op version of the game. So if you do have those questions, we can try our best to try to get back to you.
And if you're interested in learning more about the game, there is an ongoing Kickstarter campaign. We've included a link to it down below. Feel free to check them out there.
Thank you all so much for watching the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future, please consider subscribing.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.